In general, when people attack you at contact distance with weapons, they're going to use gross motor skills. So again, something like a hammer or something, when Thane attacks me here, it'd be something like an angle 1, forehand on the high line here, perhaps an angle 3, a forehand coming in trying to crush ribs or something here. Very rarely do you run into the idea of a backhanded attack like this as a purposeful attack. Where that typically comes into play is he may swing that angle 1, Darwin looms large, I get out of the way, and now I'm dealing with this backhand attack. So what we're going to do is figure out how to deal with that backhand, and then also use that when we figure that most people are right-handed, 90% of the population is right-handed. Let's also think about how to deal with a left-handed attacker who would also be feeding on that same exact angle. We break everything down by angles simply for ease of reference. So if we think of the angle 2 attack coming in, we'll just do it as an isolated motion here. So he's trying to strike the right side of my head. I'm already on what we call the outside of his body, which means that if I can monitor this arm and stop this arm, I'm not only safe from getting hit by this hammer, but I'm also safe from his left arm. So this is actually the safest place for me to be. I want to move in on this. So what I'll do with my knife is I'm going to cut his arm, and the cut here, because of what's exposed to me here, the extensor side of his forearm, this is not going to be a physiologically debilitating cut. Certainly it sucks to be him because I'm cutting him, but it's not something that's going to take away his grip on the weapon. What's really more important is that from this cut, I pivot my body forward, rotate around my hips and shoulders, and I'm checking with the back of my forearm of my left arm. What this does when he tries to strike me is I can stop this, not only get my cut, but also do it as one motion of my body. Now where I'm going to go from here, I'm chambered near my right hip. So I follow through into this position here. My next motion is going to be a step forward and thrust into his armpit. So I cut and check here, I step forward and thrust. Okay, let's take a look at this from the other side. You can see a little bit clearer from this angle. I cut and check, I step forward, and notice as I step forward, my elbow is tight to my ribs. I'm thrusting into the armpit, going after the nerves that allow his brain to control the rest of his arm. Now from this shot here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to track down his body, and I'm going to finish with our finishing shot, which is always a cut to the quadriceps muscle of the leg. Take away his mobility, ideally drop him in place. Now the trick is here, if I get too excited about doing this, notice my leg is still in the path of my knife. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to track down his body, down his ribs this way. This cut is nothing that's going to be physiologically debilitating. Again, it's more for my safety than anything else. I thrust to the inside of his leg here. I drop my elbow, create that strut, lock out his leg, cut the quadricep muscle, drop him in place, and then create distance and safety. So again, he throws at angle 2, I cut and check, I step forward and thrust. This also keeps me really safe because I'm so close to his shoulder here, he can't target me with this or with his other hand. I track down, thrust and cut into the quadricep muscle here. So we put this together fluidly, and from the other side. Now to put this into context, again, this as an isolated attack probably is not going to happen. But if he attacks with an angle 1, I evade this, now I move in. I would actually realistically apply it more in that type of context because this is not going to be a purposeful starting attack. 90% of the population is right-handed, so most of martial blade concepts, most of our approach to self-defense is geared toward that probability. But it doesn't mean you can ignore the other 10%. If you have a left-handed attacker, the most practical thing to do is to use the skills you already have and figure out how to adapt them without having to do a lot of gear changing. What I mean by that is we already know the right-handed technique against that backhanded angle 2. Well, if it's a left-handed attack, the angle of the attack is exactly the same. So let's use the same technique. So as Thane comes in, I'm still cutting and checking, turning my body with the exact same motion. What's great here is I'm actually cutting the inside of his arm, getting those flexor muscles and flexor tendons. So the probability of actually being able to take away his grip on the weapon and disable him with the first cut is much higher. If that doesn't work, cut and check, I'm still going to step forward and thrust into the armpit. But as I do, the danger here is his right hand. I don't want to eat this punch. I don't want him to grab me or whatever. So what I want to do is incorporate into my technique something that will kind of take that away. So as I'm turning this way, I'm also going to pop him in the face, turn his head a little bit. So as I'm thrusting into the armpit, I'm also striking to the face. Now also the position of his legs is a little bit different here. I don't have access to the inside of the leg for that comma cut, thrust and cut. So what I'm going to do is simply track down and cut across both quads, take both legs instead. So again, he swings, I cut and check. As I thrust to the armpit, striking to the face at the same time, track down, cut both quads, and I go. We put that together. And let's look at it from the other side as well. Okay, so it doesn't matter left-handed attack, right-handed attack. You don't want to have to think about too much. You want to keep that OODA loop as short as possible. If you think about same angle, same technique, you can defend yourself effectively with a knife.